So I wanted to show off my brand new bookish pride and joy, the 54-volume set of the great books of the Western world, originally published in 1951 by Encyclopaedia Britannica. You can see behind me, my set is the 31st printing, the gorgeous 31st printing of 1989. What I would like to do today is give you a little bit of a tour through the shelf and talk about how to read some of the great books of the Western world. You're probably already familiar with one of the editors and curators of the set, Mortimer Adler, whose How to Read a Book is one of the best guides, best practical guides to deep reading and self-scholarship. If you're interested in ripping through this great book, we actually have a lecture series running through it using the book as a secondary text, as a textbook at the Hardcore Literature Book Club. We've already covered the first half of the book, talking about the 4 different styles of reading and a lot of practical stuff, and we've got more good stuff on the way, so definitely check it out. I'll link it below if you're interested. But let's get into the set. Let's look through it together. I really want to show it off to you. So there were a lot of different editions and printings to choose from. There's a really nice sort of tan leather set, one of the older sets. And of course there are more recent sets that include more recent authors, but I really love the look of this, and I kind of put off investing in this for a while because it can be rather expensive, so it's highly recommended that you source a second-hand copy. My copies here are second-hand, and I was very fortunate enough to have this set gifted to me. But I was so impressed when this set turned up because it absolutely did not feel second-hand. It was as good as new. These books had not been opened by anyone ever. They were probably sitting on a shelf for ages. So I delayed a little bit in investing in this set, which is something you never want to do. You should try valiantly to justify expenses when it comes to reading great books and education. It's one of the most important things, along with your physical health and your mental health, that you can invest in. Of course, education is one part of having a robust mental health. There's nothing that keeps the mind as sharp as a rigorous, deep reading program. And the really exciting thing about the great books of the Western world is it's a liberal education, a classic liberal education. One might argue that it might not be as common today to get this kind of liberal education at many institutions, but it's a liberal education all on one shelf. The great thing I love about this series, which, yes, there's been a lot of works excluded, and Mortimer Adler talks about the decisions that needed to be made when curating. This is something that I have run into myself as well. You have to really put a lot of time and thought into the curation, the selection process. But the great thing about this, yes, it's not an exhaustive collection of every single book you need to read, but if you were able to read even half of these great books, you would be a very smart person, and you would have a very thorough understanding of history and science and imaginative literature. You would have a thorough understanding of yourself, of others, and the world around you and your place in it. The incredible thing about undertaking a deep reading program or embarking upon a deep reading program is once you get, say, 6 months into a deep reading program or a year into that program, you are incredibly impressed by how much you didn't know the previous year. And you're impressed by that because you can feel your consciousness expanding. You can feel your reasoning powers expanding. You can feel your moral principles becoming more robust, and you can feel yourself becoming more empathetic, more in tune with other people, and more in tune with the rhythms of your own heart and soul. It's quite an incredible experience. It's an uncanny experience. It can be rather uncomfortable at times, but ultimately it's incredibly exciting, and it's incredibly exhilarating to make your way through the great books. And Adler and the editors of this series continuously deploy the metaphor of a great conversation. Working your way through the great books is you participating in a conversation that spans thousands of years and many disparate traditions. The really exciting thing about breaching a new great book is you get another piece of the conversation, and you get to play a part in that conversation. You get to listen in on what the great writers have said to each other, and you get to think through all of these different key themes and preoccupations of the human condition for yourself. You can feel yourself becoming more knowledgeable. And it most certainly is a conversation. Anybody who has worked their way through such a set, anybody who has breached several great works within a relatively short time frame, will realise that these works build upon each other. The great writers allude to one another, respond to one another, refute one another, and build upon one another. So this is a great foundation, this is a great grounding in a really enviable liberal education. I think if we had more citizens undertaking such a deep reading program like the one on offer at the Hardcore Literature Book Club, then that would only be an immensely positive thing for the world. Now, of course, thinking about your reading as a great conversation is really useful, and as you drop into the conversation, you realise where your own blind spots are. The really exciting thing for me is focusing on those areas that haven't been given the best service over the years. I'm confident in my expertise when it comes to imaginative literature and philosophy, but when it comes to science and maths, that is a whole exciting new territory to explore. Whilst I have read some of the key influential scientific, sociological and anthropological texts, the really cool thing about this set is seeing where the gaps are that need to be filled. And for me, I've always been aesthetically minded, I've always been fascinated with literature and art generally and the great questions of the human condition. But I could definitely use some focused attention when it comes to science and mathematics, and so I'm very excited to embark upon that. Now, when the set turned up, you better believe I went straight to my favourite authors, you better believe I went straight to those writers who are on the Hardcore Literature Book Club syllabus or will be in the future. Basically, I didn't really know what to expect when the set turned up. I thought there's no way that they can economically produce a high quality set, and I kind of thought, and this is due to my experience with other book sets, I kind of thought maybe it looks really nice, the spines look really nice, it's all show, but when you crack it open, maybe the font isn't the best, maybe the layout isn't the best, maybe they cut some corners. I was blown away by the quality, not only of the exterior, but the interior too. Let's look through some of my favourites and you'll see that the quality is really, really high, which I was really happy with because these books need to be readable and rereadable. So, the first book that I went to was Herman Melville, the Herman Melville volume, which contains Moby Dick, and as you may notice, they are colour-coded depending on the kind of loose genre or loose category they would be put in. So imaginative literature gets this kind of, I don't know what you would call that, like a yellow, dark, greenish kind of colour. Science is in green and we put history in blue. But when you crack open Moby Dick, firstly I was really happy that it had all of the extracts and the etymology at the start. A lot of editions do not include that, which is a crime. And then I went straight to that really famous first page, Loomings, Call Me Ishmael, and I was blown away by the quality of the font and the layout. Very, very readable. In fact, I would say this is one of the nicest volumes of Moby Dick I possess now. After Herman Melville, I went straight to Tolstoy and Dostoyevsky, and then of course I was absolutely thrilled to see that Shakespeare had been given 2 volumes, all to himself. He most certainly requires it, and these 2 volumes are structured chronologically. So you can see if we take the first volume down, what do we have here? We have his very early history plays, Henry VI, Part 1, 2 and 3, Richard III, Comedy of Errors, Titus, Andronicus, and if you go on a little bit further, you have Romeo and Juliet, A Midsummer Night's Dream, The Merchant of Venice, Much Ado About Nothing. They're all here. And once again, in my humble opinion, I think they've done a beautiful job with the layout. And Shakespeare is not the only author who's been given 2 volumes all to himself. Aristotle has been given 2 volumes, which I am thrilled with. I know that Adler is a huge fan of both Aristotle and Plato. You can see that's 1 volume of Aristotle there, and of course I turned immediately to Aristotle's Ethics. We've got a good series of podcasts breaking down Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics that if you haven't checked out you might be interested in. Again, I'll link it down below. Plato, I turned straight to the Republic in anticipation for our upcoming lecture series, Plato's Poetics, reading the Republic as imaginative literature. That's going to be good fun. Gibbon also got 2 volumes, The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire, as did Thomas Aquinas. I also went straight to Cervantes Don Quixote, I went straight to Milton, and I was overjoyed to see that there was not only Paradise Lost but Areopagitica and all of his great poems. I went to Pascal's Pensées, yeah, Pascal's in there. I went to Charles Darwin, and of course I had to check out Who the translator was that they chose for Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey. They went with Samuel Butler, potentially a contentious choice, but I must say I absolutely adore what Butler has done. I adore his rendering of Homer into prose. Yes, I have many favourite translators, but we'll get into that another time in our upcoming Homer taste test. I know obviously they might have had to make certain decisions when it came to translators based on what was in the common domain. So for example, with Tolstoy and Dostoyevsky, I believe they have gone with Constance Garnett, but to be honest, most of our influential writers who have been influenced by Tolstoy and Dostoyevsky would have read them in the Constance Garnett translation, so if it was good enough for the likes of Hemingway, it must be good enough for us too. I also went to Aeschylus and I immediately read Prometheus Bound in one sitting, and I was absolutely overawed by it. Rereading Prometheus Bound after a couple of years, once one has brought a little bit of lived experience to the work, is an incredibly sublime experience. It's rather close to how I would imagine one would experience Shakespeare if they came to the bard after living a little bit of their life and having brought with them everything they've learned from everything else they've read. Now, how would you read such a collection? Well, there's a variety of different approaches. You could read through relatively chronologically. You could march your way through the tradition, and that way you will see where each successive writer has built on the writer that came before them. If you were to do that, you would start with Homer, and then you would move on to the Greek tragedians and the Greek writers of comedy, Aristophanes and Aeschylus and Sophocles, and then you would move through Herodotus, Plato, Aristotle, Hippocrates, Euclid, Lucretius, and so that's one way to do it too. You could also make use of the syntopicon, which is kind of like an index, and wherever you find your interest pulling you, you could begin there. So you would go through the syntopicon and you would pick, say, war, or war and peace, or justice, or love. You would pick one of these grand topics and you would go through kind of like a smorgasbord, a tasting platter, and you would learn a little bit around that topic. There's also Adler's, I believe this is Adler's recommendation, or this is the recommendation of the editors of the set. They've put together a 10-year reading plan, and it isn't overstuffed. It actually shows that they've erred on the side of understacking it with books, and it's really pertinent to say, and this is an echo of Adler, that you cannot speed read these books. You need to take them very, very slow. There's actually a really nice old interview, TV C-SPAN interview with Adler, and a teacher of speed reading calls in and really does solicit Adler's furore. He says that he teaches people how to speed read the great books, and Adler says really quite defiantly, you cannot speed read the great books. You cannot read each of these books in a week. You definitely can't read them in a day. You should probably take about a month per book, but ideally if you had longer, that would be better. And what are you doing in that time? You're journaling, you're rereading, you're sitting at a table in solitude with a pen and paper. So actually it should take you several minutes, if not longer, per page as you're wrestling with each of these great books. I know we all want to have all of the knowledge already in our head, and we get really excited about acquiring all of these different great works, but we need to see our reading as a long-term self-development, self-improvement, self-scholarship project, and we really need to relish every stage of the journey. We need to enjoy the journey, embrace the process of filling our head with this knowledge, and not rush towards the destination, because ultimately this is a destination that we will never reach. It's a lifelong journey, and it's a project that can never be completed, so we must embrace a slower pace. And these books really do deserve time spent over them. They deserve lots of sleep cycles. They deserve to have their ideas brought into your day-to-day conversation. They deserve you taking their ideas into your lived experience and then taking your lived experience back to them. And that's part of the benefit of having a reading program curated for you, because there most certainly are too many books and too little time. So we need to make sure that the books we do decide to focus our time on are selected wisely. Personally, my reading of them is a little bit of a hybrid approach. There's one part of me that feels overjoyed by the prospect of marching through chronologically and rereading those works I have already come in contact with, because I would say I've read a good proportion of the books here. It's part of the reason why I put off getting the set, because I had the books in disparate volumes already. And so I would love a chronological marching on my end, but I'm also hyper-focusing on those areas that I would like to improve upon. And as I said, for me, that's science. So who would that look like in this set? That would look like Galileo. That would look like Copernicus. Indeed, that would look like Faraday. And the really great thing about these volumes is they come replete with scientific illustrations and scary looking equations. Got a wonderful chapter here about electricity. Let me show you Darwin, because the illustrations are really nice in his volume. There he is. You see some of those illustrations? Aren't they absolutely gorgeous? Got a great one here of some birds. So, who do we have in the great books? Well, we've got all the most influential philosophers. We've got Kant and Hegel. Of course, we have the Greeks too. We've got a great selection of imaginative literature. Melville, Shakespeare, Dante, Chaucer, Homer, Tolstoy, Dostoyevsky. We've got Adam Smith. We've got the American State Papers. Again, this is something I would like to learn a little bit more about myself, so I'm really curious about that. We've got Marx and Engels. We've got the Communist Manifesto. We've got Goethe, Montaigne, Locke, Berkeley. We've got Plutarch and Virgil. It's a great set. It's a good fun set, and it's a lovely thing to just flick through, run one's fingers across the spines and select a little bit of reading material for one's evening. Now, I'll tell you this, I have been a great advocate for the scriptural reading approach, reading great literature as scripture, reading philosophy and poetry, and indeed, well, very, very soon, science as scripture, bringing the focus and care and attention and love that a dedicated devotee of a religion would bring to their faith, bringing that to the work before you. And so this will be my scriptural reading allotment, and I'll do a little bit every other day or so, and I'll have great fun doing so. And so that's my Great Books of the Western World set. I hope you enjoyed rifling through that, and do let me know, where would you focus with such a set? What books would you go immediately to? Thank you very much for watching. Have a lovely day and happy reading, everybody. Bye bye for now.